Hello and welcome to another episode about how to learn to code in Python for absolute beginners. If this is the first time here, please check out the other videos in the playlist. You don't need any previous knowledge to start this course. Today we are going to learn about dictionaries, a new data type, and about logical operators. Let's get into it. A dictionary is a collection data type, the same as we learned before, which were lists or also called arrays. A dictionary is basically the same, but the difference is that every element has a key that can be identified, that particular element. So it doesn't have an index as we did before, like counting from 0 to whatever number it is. We don't index the elements one by one, but in case of the dictionary, we find the element that we want based on a key. For example, let's say that we want to create an old-fashioned phone book for our contacts. So to start doing this, let's think about the first element of this phone book. It's one contact. That is going to be a person most of the time, and it's going to have a name, age, surname, phone number, address, every data we want to put. So in this case, let's make it simple and say let's have a name, an age, and a phone number. So the first element of this dictionary that we will create will be one contact. So think about in terms of one element that we want to create. So one contact would be something like name, for example, John, age, it's 32, and phone, let's say is living in the UK, and he has 3. And we close the curly brackets. Well, if we print this, we will see these formats here. We have curly brackets, then name, John, age 32, phone, this, and close the curly brackets. Well, this is one dictionary, and each data we have here is listed by its key. Let's take a look at this in the whiteboard. Let's review a little bit what we learned in the previous episode. For example, we have a list, names, and lists open square brackets as we see here. And then we had each of these elements here is a position 0, position 1, position 2. So we list every element by their index, which is called. A dictionary is something a little bit different. It's also a collection type. It means that it has several elements inside, but each of these elements here are identified not by an index, but by what is called a key. So in the example before, when we have one contact, we basically have every single piece of unique data, which is here, identified by one key. So the key name corresponds to, in this case, the name John, the key age, the age 42, and the key phone to the phone number. So basically every piece of information in this dictionary is identified by one key, not by one index number. And this makes the way of cataloging, that indexing and creating the data, a complete different concept. Each element can be identified as a key value pair. So keys are unique. You don't have the same key. If you had the same key, basically you replace the previous key with a new one. And values, of course, can be the same because internally they are really different. But from a data point of view, you can have, for example, two values with the same number. But the key is the most important part to identify the data that you're looking for. You can also imagine it as a way of organizing data, like here keys is like in a box and then points to another one, which is the data that you want. So as you can see, these keys have to be unique. Let's take a look at the shell here. For example, this is the same contact that we wrote before. Now we want to get just one element, in this case the name. The format to do this is very similar to the list that we learned in the previous episode. The difference is here that we input the name between the square brackets instead of the index number. If we enter here, we get John as a result because that's the value of the key called name. The very powerful feature of the dictionary is that the data that you gather is identified by a key that has a meaning. You usually give keys a particular meaningful name, meaning that, for example, in a list, you get the elements by the index. And sometimes that's not that friendly because you don't know that by an index, for example, 0 or 1 or 2, it doesn't really mean anything about the data that is there. But in a dictionary, when you have an element which is identified by a key called name or age or phone number, address, or anything you want, you're basically giving that particular data a name, a meaning. So when you query that, you already know what kind of data you are retrieving from that collection type. If we want to get the age, it's the same, but in this case, we change age and we get 32. Another thing that you have to notice is that the value is going to be of any kind of data type that you want. For example, age is an int and phone and name are strings. If we want to use a type function that we know from before, we just type and then we can pass directly the element that is located for that key in particular is returning here an int. If I do the same, but instead of age, we put name, we get a string. Let's say that we want to add a new element to this contact, for example, a nickname. Well, we just follow the same syntax, contact, then we open the square brackets, and in this case, we just type the name of the key, nickname, and we give it a value. For example, let's say that John is called Johnny. If we query again, we get here that the name is John, age, phone, and nickname is Johnny. Another thing you have to take into consideration is that the order doesn't matter in a dictionary. That's the difference with a list. In the list, the order is actually enforced because you have an index. So you have to start from 0, 1, 2, 3, and so forth. But here, the only way to identify an element is by the key. So you don't really care the order, the inside order of that dictionary, because when you query the data, you will have to focus on what kind of data you're querying, not the order it was inputted. If we want to change the value of an element, well, we follow the same syntax that we followed initially here to create a new one. We just go to contact. Let's say that we want to change the age. Age equal, in this case, instead of 32, let's say that it was 23. And then we query and we print again the contents of contact. Then we see it was updated. You can see here that I use interchangeable like double quotes, single quotes, it doesn't matter. As long as they are consistent at the beginning and at the end, both of them identify a string. If we try to retrieve a key that doesn't exist, we get an error. For example, contact, address, we will get key error because the key address doesn't exist. Let's say that we want to eliminate one of the elements of the dictionary. We can do the same, use the same function as before we know for the lists, for the arrays, called pop. The difference is that in a list, you have the elements from the beginning to the end. That makes sense because it's an index collection type. So you have the first element in the position 0 and the last element at any position it ends up. So pop, you can either pass, for example, position number 5, meaning I want to eliminate and return me the element at position number 5, or you just pass directly the function pop with empty parameters. What it means is it's going to go to the last one, eliminate it, and return it to you. So that concept of having a last one is something that you have in a list, but you don't have that in a dictionary because elements in a dictionary they don't have any order. They are identified by the key. So in this case, we need to pass the key that we want to remove. For example, we want to eliminate the nickname from our phone book in contact. So we pass that, and the element, in this case Johnny, which is corresponding to that nickname in this contact, is returned. If we print the contents of contact again, we see that it's not there anymore. Well, this phone book is not complete because we just know how to create one contact, but we want several contacts. Well, a dictionary cannot have a key with the same name because, as you saw before, if we just put the same name for the same key, it's going to just replace that value. So what we need here is to combine the two data types. We have the list data type, which has a sequential of elements, and we have the dictionary, which had the same sequence of elements, but they're identified by keys. What if an element of this list is a dictionary? So you can combine, because remember, a list can have any kind of objects inside, not just numbers or strings or booleans. It can have anything. And a dictionary is an object. In Python, everything, absolutely everything is an object. So you can have a dictionary which is an element of a list, and that element will have an index. Let's see an example. We have a list called contacts, and we put that in plural on purpose, and it is empty. And now we create one element, contacts append. Remember, append is a function to add an element to a list. And inside the parentheses, we can create directly here a dictionary. Name, John, age, 42, phone, as you can see here, we are passing this dictionary as one element for this array. So let's print it. If we run the program, we see that we get an error. Yeah, and yeah, here, you see, I forgot, and I should put here a comma. That's a syntax error. That's very common to happen. So let's clear here the shell and run again. And here we have that the square brackets that you can see here and the curly brackets inside identify the dictionary. If we want to type here, say like type contacts and run, we will see that it's a list, because here we defined it as a list, and inside it has, in this case, only one element, which is the dictionary. Let's query the length, and we have 1 because it has only one element. The dictionary inside might have a lot of stuff, but for the list point of view, it has only one thing, one element, which is that dictionary. So let's add more stuff. After adding more people, if we run this again, we can see it's a little bit difficult to read, but look at, you have to get used to read sometimes a little bit cryptic amount of data that is just displayed in the screen. So for example, here we see, okay, the square brackets, it means it's an array, and inside we have one element of the dictionary, another element of the list, sorry, and another one here. So one for John, Mary, and Mike. As you can see, inside of each of these dictionaries, we have the keys name, age, and phone. Let's write our phone book app. But before that, let's learn something very simple, which is called logical operators. It is going to help us a lot for developing this small app. The main logical operators are OR and NOT. Think about OR as something that you only want one thing to happen and the other ones don't happen. I know this is quite abstract. So let's say, for example, I want an ice cream of chocolate or vanilla or coffee. I don't care which of them. You can give me one of them. Each of them is fine. So from a conditional point of view in the programming, it will be, is chocolate true or false? Is vanilla true or false? Is coffee true or false? So the OR is just giving me that I just want one of these options to happen, to be true for me to pass and continue. I don't care. At least one of them has to be true. Now let's say that I want an ice cream that is chocolate and vanilla and coffee. I don't want something in between. I don't want one of them missing. I want the 3 flavors there. I don't want one missing. If one doesn't happen, I don't want the ice cream at all. That's the difference between OR and AND. Now, the NOT operator is a bit special because as before, we were talking about several elements here. So OR only happens if you have 2 things. I want this element or this one, either. And as well works as I want this element and this element. These 2 things have to happen at the same time. But the NOT one just changes the value of one element by itself. It changes its nature. For example, if I have a variable that represents a Boolean that has a value true, and I apply the not operator, what it does is inverts the logic. It makes from true, it transforms it to false. So let's see an example here. Let's say A is true, B is false, and if A or B, print is true, else print is false. If we run this, we see that the result is true. The reason is, as I said before, that OR just wants one of the values to be true. In this case, A is true, B is false, but it doesn't care. As soon as one of them is true, it stops there. It doesn't even care about the values of the other ones. So it's the same as I was saying before about the ice cream. I want it either to be chocolate or vanilla or coffee or whatever. Just want one of them. I don't need all of them to be that particular flavor. If I change the value of A to false and I run this again, then it's false because at least one of them has to be true. But if all of them are false, then OR is going to return false as well. Let's create another value here. C is equal to true. And we add another OR with C. If we run this, try to think about what it's going to be before running it. It's going to be true. Why? Because one of them, at least C, is true. Okay, I think that OR gets pretty clear right now. So let's try the same with AND. If we run this, it's going to be false. And the reason is because AND wants two of them, all of them, whatever amount of values are there, to be true at the same time. It doesn't want one of them to be false. As I said in the example of the ice cream, I want the three flavors, the chocolate, vanilla, and coffee together. I don't want any other. I don't want any missing one. That or nothing. Now, if I change B to true and I run this again, then it's going to be true. Again, if I add value C and this is true as well, and I add another AND and C, this is going to be true because every one of them is true. If just one of them is false, in this case B, and we run again, it's going to be false. So see, AND is very strict in those terms. Now, let's see what the NOT operator is about. For example, A is equal to true. So if I say if A, and that's it, well, this is pretty obvious. It's going to be true because A is true, and it's going to evaluate to this one, true. Okay. Now, NOT doesn't work with two values, two variables. It works only with one. So if I say if not A, this is pretty obvious in English. It's like if not A, it means the opposite of it, then it's true. Otherwise, it's false. So A is true here. Let's follow this part here. A is true. So not A will be the opposite. And the only opposite for true is false. So all of this is going to be evaluated, is going to be replaced by false. Because A is true and the not operator inverts, changes its value. So this whole thing here is going to be false. So if I run this, it's going to tell me this is false because not altered that output by replacing, inverting the logic of A instead of true is false. If A is false, starting as false, then not A is going to transform that into true. And then all of this is going to be true. If we run it, then we have it is true here. So it's important to understand this concept of OR, AND, and NOT. There's a lot of information of this on the web. I'm going to leave some links below so you can just dig further on this. And you can have all sorts of combinations. And an important thing you have to remember as well is that you can also use parentheses here. So for example, I can say that A or B is evaluated first and then, for example, C. So if we have here, for example, A is true and B is equal to false, and C is equal to true, for example, this is going to be true because A or B is one of them. In this case, it's going to be true, even if B is false. And that is going to be and C, which is true. So it's going to be true and true, therefore true. You see, it can be very complicated. It's a simple concept if you think about it. It's just something to be true or to be false. There's nothing like beyond that. But when we start combining them with these operators, it can get very convoluted and complicated to think about. So it's important to remember that you can use parentheses to group particular operations to happen first, and then the other ones will happen after those has been executed. But you have to actually focus and try to think and follow the reasoning there. One thing I really advise is not to make any of these too complex, because when things get more complicated in the code and you are not just checking simple values as we are doing here or something more complex, then nobody's going to understand the code. And I assure you, you're not going to understand it either after a week or even less. Let's create our phonebook app now. So first we need an array, a list of empty values, which is going to hold all the contacts that we are going to add to this phonebook. Then we need a while loop to keep asking us a question. Remember, we are going to create a menu, and the menu is going to appear several times for us, so it's going to keep asking those questions all over. So we put true here, so we know that this while loop is going to run forever, but remember that we have to find a way to exit this loop, otherwise it's never going to end. Here is pretty simple. It's what we already know. We have the name of the variable, and then we have input or input age, input phone, save, yes or no, or enter to exit. So this is something that we already learned from the previous episodes. So if save is equal to yes, or save is equal to yes, then we are going to save this contact. And we also append that particular contact to the empty array that we have here. Here we're going to learn a new keyword, elif. Before we saw that we have if something, if it's true or false. If it's true, do this, else do something else. In this case, we have a different kind of situation where we have something that if this is true, and if it isn't, well, I don't want to exit there. I want to check also this other condition. If this is not true, then check if this is true as well. If it isn't, then, for example, check again. Then check if this something else, whenever, is also true. And at the end, if none of them, then, for example, else, and then you do something about it. So it's a way to include several options inside one conditional. So in this case, elif save is equal to no, or save is equal to no, then continue. It will not save any of the data. It's not going to save any of the data that we inputted into the list. It's just going to continue in the while loop. So it's going to jump back here at the beginning, and it's going to ask you again the same questions. And at the end, if none of these things happen, if it's not a yes, if it's not a no, then it's something else. In this case, we just wrote here enter, exit, but it's a bit of a lie, because in reality, you can just type anything you want. But enter will be easier for a user. It's more user-friendly just to type enter at the end by not giving any particular answer. And what it's going to do is going to exit the loop. And as we did here, we have a loop that never ends. That's why it's very important that we have a particular condition that will break this loop. When we finish the loop, we want to print the list of contacts that we added to this phone book. Of course, this app is not going to save it anywhere. We are still far from getting there, how to save data into a file. We will, but for the time being, we are just printing the contents of the contacts array in the screen. If we run this, then we have name, for example, John, age 42, and the phone is going to be this. Save, yes, no, enter, exit. Let's say yes for this one. Then the next name is going to be Mary. Then it's going to be 34. Then it's going to be a phone number of, let's do this, and then save. Let's say yes again. In this case, let's test it and say yes completely. And then we are going to write another one, but this case I'm going to make a typo. I forget to add the age. Just press enter and say I didn't realize that. Then put a number that is also wrong. Okay, no, I don't want to add Mike to the list. Say no. So it's a no. And then here I'm going to do again Mike. I'm going to add the age this time, 56, a phone number of this would be the correct one. And I say, in this case, yes, I want to enter. Now, I don't want to do anything else, and I want to enter exit. I want to exit this program, right? So because we don't have that condition at the beginning, we basically have to press enter to these 3 entries. And here, when we get at the enter, we press enter and the program finishes. So as you can see, let's analyze a little bit this. Let's move this up. So we have here that we enter first John and we say yes. Then we enter Mary and we say, in this case, yes, completely the word. So John is here and Mary is here. So this worked as well. And then we try to add Mike with without age in a wrong number. Then we say no. And actually it worked because, as you can see here, the Mike that we later add that was correct has the data and this one doesn't. So the program is working. And at the end, when we press enter, the program didn't add anything new, didn't populate the list with empty values, which is something that could happen if we didn't write this in the proper logical order. So the array, the list doesn't have any ghost values or anything like that, and ended the program and finished it. And then printed the contents of the list in our screen. So as you can see, this is a very simple program, but we are using all the things that we learned. So just to summarize quickly, we learned about dictionaries, that you access data directly from the key, and based on the key, you get the value that you want. We mixed dictionaries and lists. So you have a list which elements are dictionaries, and each of the dictionaries had different contexts in this phone book. Then we learned about logical operators. We can have an if condition when we check for something to be true or something to be true or false. In this case, if it's the first one is true, the second one is not going to be checked. Then we learned about the AND operator, which was both or more conditions to be true, all of them. And then we learned about the NOT operator, which basically changes the value, changes opposite, creates the inverse logic of a particular value. If something is true, it's going to transform that into false. If something is false, it's going to transform that into true. And finally, we learned about this other way that we can add more conditions to an if conditional block where we have a if. So we can have several options. Imagine that you have a menu with several options. You can use this to basically list all of them. If this, no, well, check for this, no, check for this, yes or no, and so forth until you get to the end. And that basically summarizes the chapter for today. In the next episode, we are going to learn about the for loop. It's a different kind of loop, different than the while loop that we learned here. And it's going to help us a lot to represent, to print the values of a dictionary or a list. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments. I'll be happy to answer them as many as I can. Thank you for watching.